The smell of smoke and whiskey filled her nostrils as Delilah Evans wiped down the bar counter for the 100th time that evening, her hands trembling as she watched the ranch hand slide a handwritten note across the scarred wood surface toward her employer. She had learned to nod, to smile, to pretend she understood when customers left written orders or when her boss posted new rules on the wall behind the bar, but the truth burned in her chest like swallowed coals. At 22 years old, she could not read a single word, and the shame of it followed her like a shadow through every day of her life in Black Hawk, Colorado, in the summer of 1878. The mining town had grown rapidly over the past decade, sprawling up the mountainside with its saloons and supply stores, its promises of gold and fresh starts. Delilah had arrived 3 months earlier after her father's death left her with nothing but a wagon and the clothes on her back. She had sold the wagon to pay for a room above the general store and found work at the Lucky Dollar Saloon, where her inability to read remained her most closely guarded secret. She had become an expert at deception, at watching others for cues, at memorizing drink prices and table numbers through sheer repetition. "Delilah, you got that order written down?" Her boss, Morton, called from across the room. Her stomach dropped. "I can remember it just fine, Mr. Morton." No need to waste paper. He grunted his approval, and she released the breath she had been holding. These small victories felt hollow, temporary. Every day brought new challenges, new moments where her secret threatened to surface like a body in shallow water. The evening crowd began to thin as midnight approached. Delilah collected empty glasses and coins from the tables, her feet aching in her worn boots. She was reaching for a glass on the corner table when the saloon doors swung open, and a man walked in with the kind of quiet confidence that made people turn and look. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. Dust covered his clothing, and he carried himself with the easy grace of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot. He removed his hat as he approached the bar, revealing a face that was handsome in a rugged, weather-worn way. Delilah guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27. "Whiskey," he said, his voice low and steady, "and information if you have it." Delilah poured his drink with practiced efficiency. "What kind of information?" "Looking for work. Heard there might be ranches hiring hands for the season." He lifted the glass, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Not threatening, but searching, as though he could see past the careful walls she had built. "The Morrison Ranch is always looking," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "About 5 miles west of town. The carpenter place might need help too, but I hear the pay is not as good." He nodded slowly, taking a measured sip. "You are not from around here originally." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "Kansas. Came up after my pa passed. Sorry for your loss." The sympathy in his voice sounded genuine, not perfunctory. "I am Flynn Voss. Most people just call me Flynn. Delilah Evans." She hesitated, then added, "Most people just call me Delilah." A smile flickered across his face, brief but warm. "Pleased to meet you, Delilah." Over the next week, Flynn became a regular at the Lucky Dollar. He had taken a job at the Morrison Ranch, working cattle and mending fences, and he stopped by most evenings for a drink and conversation. Delilah found herself looking forward to his visits, to the way he spoke to her like a person rather than just a barmaid. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning the ranching trade from his father before striking out on his own. He had a way of talking that made even ordinary things sound interesting. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked one evening, leaning against the bar. "Seems like rough country for someone on their own." "Where would I go?" Delilah countered, polishing a glass. "This is as good as anywhere else." You deserve better than pouring drinks for drunk minors. His eyes held hers. You are smart, resourceful. I can see it in how you handle things around here. The compliment made her chest tighten. If only he knew the truth, he would not think her smart at all. He would see her as she saw herself, ignorant and lacking. 2 weeks after their first meeting, everything changed. Morton called Delilah into the back room after her shift ended, his expression grave. "Got a problem, girl," he said, gesturing to a ledger spread open on his desk. "Numbers are not adding up. Been short on the till 3 nights running." Delilah's heart hammered. "I have not taken anything, Mr. Morton. I swear it." "Did not say you did. But I need you to look at these figures. Tell me if you see where the mistake might be." He turned the ledger toward her, expectant. She stared at the page, at the incomprehensible marks and numbers that might as well have been in a foreign language. Her mouth went dry. I am not good with complicated figures like that. It is just basic arithmetic, girl. 4th grade schooling should cover it." Suspicion crept into his voice. "I am real tired, Mr. Morton. Could I look at it tomorrow when my head is clearer?" He studied her for a long moment, and she saw the realization dawn in his eyes. "You cannot read it at all, can you?" The shame crashed over her like a physical weight. She wanted to lie, to deflect, but the words would not come. Her silence was answer enough. "Well, that explains a lot," Morton said, not unkindly. "The way you always memorize orders, how you never write anything down. Should have figured it sooner." "Please do not fire me," Delilah whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I work hard. I do not make mistakes with the drinks or the money. I can keep track of everything in my head." Morton sighed, rubbing his face. "I am not firing you. But this puts me in a difficult spot. I need someone who can help with the books when things get busy. Maybe we can work something out, but you need to learn. There is no shame in not knowing, girl, only in not trying." Delilah fled the saloon as soon as he dismissed her, humiliation burning through her veins. She walked without direction through the dark streets of Black Hawk, past the mining operations that ran through the night, past the smaller saloons and boarding houses. She ended up on the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrub grass and pine trees, sitting on a fallen log with her head in her hands. "Thought I might find you out here." She looked up to find Flynn approaching, his face concerned in the moonlight. "How did you know where I was?" "Saw you leave the saloon looking upset. Followed to make sure you were all right." He sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Want to talk about it?" Everything in her screamed to keep the secret buried, to protect herself from his judgment. But she was so tired of hiding, of carrying the weight alone. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I cannot read. Not a single word. Never went to school because my ma died when I was 6 and pa needed me to work the farm. Then he got sick and there was never time and I just never learned." Her voice broke. "Morton found out tonight. He was kind about it, but I saw the pity in his eyes. That is what I cannot stand, the pity." Flynn was quiet for a moment, and she braced herself for his reaction. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than pitying. "My sister could not read either. She had some trouble with her eyes that made the letters jump around on the page. Took us years to figure it out. My mother taught her anyway, patient as could be, and eventually she learned. Took time, but she got there." He turned to look at Delilah. "There is nothing shameful about not knowing something. Only thing that matters is whether you want to learn." "Of course I want to learn," she said fiercely. "But who has time to teach a grown woman her letters? And even if someone did, I would just be slow and stupid about it." "You are not stupid." His voice was firm. "And I could teach you." She stared at him. "You, I can read just fine. Had a decent education before I took up ranching, and I have my evenings free." He met her gaze steadily. "If you are willing, I am offering." "Why would you do that?" Suspicion colored her question. Men did not offer help without expecting something in return. Because everyone deserves the chance to learn, Flynn said simply. And because I like you, Delilah. You are tough and honest, and you work harder than anyone I have seen. Figure you deserve someone in your corner. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. I do not have money to pay you. Did not ask for money, just asking if you want to learn. She thought about Morton's ledgers, about the signs she could not read, about all the small humiliations that punctuated her days. She thought about the future, about being trapped forever in jobs that required no reading, about the limitations that illiteracy placed on her life. Yes, she said quietly, I want to learn. They began the next evening. Flynn brought a worn primer that he said had belonged to his sister, along with paper and a pencil. They met after Delilah's shift ended in a clearing just outside town where Flynn built a fire. The location offered privacy and comfort, away from curious eyes and potential gossip. We will start with the alphabet, Flynn said, settling across from her beside the fire. 26 letters, and they all have sounds. Once you know the sounds, you can put them together to make words. It was harder than Delilah had imagined. The letters seemed to swim on the page, and remembering which symbol made which sound felt impossible. She grew frustrated quickly, throwing down the pencil after her 5th failed attempt to write the letter B. I cannot do this. My brain is not made for it. Your brain is fine, Flynn said patiently. You just learned everything else differently. This will take time, but you will get it. He moved to sit beside her rather than across from her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Look, let me show you how I learned to remember. The letter B looks like it has a belly, see? 2 round parts stacked up, and it makes the bus sound. Belly buh, try it again. His patience was infinite. When she forgot a letter, he reminded her without judgment. When she grew discouraged, he told her about his sister's struggles and eventual triumph. When she finally managed to write all 26 letters correctly, his proud smile made her chest feel light. You did it, he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. That is the foundation right there. Everything else builds from this. They fell into a routine. Every evening after her shift, Delilah would make her way to their spot by the fire where Flynn waited. He brought the primer and patience, and she brought determination that surprised them both. The summer nights grew cooler as they worked through letters and sounds, then simple words. Cat, she read slowly one evening in late August, sounding out each letter. Cat, I did it. That word says cat. It does indeed. Flynn's smile was radiant in the firelight. You are reading, Delilah. The realization hit her like lightning. She was reading. It was just one simple word, but it was real. She had looked at marks on a page and extracted meaning from them. Her eyes filled with tears. Hey now, Flynn said softly, concerned. What is wrong? Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. She wiped at her face, laughing through the tears. I just never thought I would be able to do this. Never thought someone would take the time. Flynn reached out and gently caught one of her tears on his thumb. The gesture was intimate, tender. You are worth the time, Delilah. You have always been worth it. Something shifted between them in that moment. The air seemed charged, heavy with unspoken feeling. Delilah found herself leaning toward him, drawn by something stronger than gravity. Flynn cupped her face in his calloused hand. I should tell you something. I did not plan on this when I offered to teach you. I just wanted to help. But somewhere along the way, I started looking forward to these evenings for more than just the teaching. Started thinking about you during the day, wondering what you were doing, hoping you were all right. I think about you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. All the time. He kissed her then, soft and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not pull away. Instead, she kissed him back, pouring into it all the gratitude and growing affection she had been harboring. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time in years, Delilah felt safe. They broke apart slowly, and Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Delilah Evans. Probably have been since the first night I walked into that saloon." "I am falling in love with you too," she confessed, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing. "I tried not to. Seemed like a foolish thing to do when I have nothing to offer." "You have everything to offer." His voice was fierce. "You are everything I want." The lessons continued, but now they were punctuated with stolen kisses and long conversations that ranged far beyond reading. Flynn told her about his dreams of having his own ranch someday, of building something lasting. Delilah shared her fears and hopes, finding in him a listener who never judged, only understood. By September, she could read simple sentences from the primer. By October, as the aspen trees turned gold on the mountainsides, she was working through a basic reader that Flynn had purchased at the general store. She read haltingly, with frequent pauses, but she read. Morton noticed the change in her. "You have been practicing," he said one afternoon, surprise evident in his voice. She had just successfully read a supply order without having to pretend. "I have," she confirmed, allowing herself a small smile. "Good for you, girl. Takes courage to face something like that." He paused. "You have been happier lately, too. That cowboy have anything to do with it?" Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "Maybe. He treats you right. Better than right. He treats me like I matter." Morton nodded approvingly. "That is how it should be." As autumn deepened into winter, Flynn's teaching expanded beyond reading. He began bringing newspapers from Denver, helping her work through the articles. The wider world opened up to her through those printed pages. She learned about politics and inventions, about places far beyond Black Hawk, Colorado. Each word she conquered felt like a personal victory. One evening in November, snow beginning to fall around their fire, Flynn set aside the newspaper they had been reading. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his expression serious. Delilah's stomach clenched. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, but I have been thinking about the future. The Morrison Ranch is good work, but it is not mine. I will always just be a hired hand there." He took her hands in his. "I have been saving money for years. Almost have enough for a down payment on my own land. There is a property about 10 miles north of here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. Small cabin already built, needs work, but it is solid. I could make something of it." "That sounds wonderful," Delilah said, though she felt a thread of worry. Was he telling her he was leaving? "I want you to come with me," Flynn said, his gray eyes intense. "As my wife. I know it is not much to offer right now, just a rough cabin and a lot of hard work ahead. But I will build you a good life, Delilah. I promise you that. We will work the land together, build something that is ours, and I will keep teaching you, help you learn whatever you want to know." Her heart felt too large for her chest. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you to marry me, to build a life with me, to take a chance on a future together." His voice softened. "I love you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and teach you to read by the fire every evening for the rest of our lives." "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her like a dam breaking. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Flynn." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they broke apart, both breathless, he was grinning. "We will do this right," he said. "I will talk to the pastor, arrange a proper wedding, and I will start the paperwork on that land. By spring, we will have our own place." They were married on a cold December morning in the small church at the center of Black Hawk. Delilah wore a simple dress that one of the saloon girls had helped her sew, and Flynn wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut. Morton stood as a witness, along with several of Flynn's friends from the Morrison Ranch. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Delilah felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered to Flynn as they walked out of the church into the winter sunlight. "A husband who loves me, a future." "You have it now," he said, kissing her forehead, "and I will spend every day making sure you never doubt it." They spent the winter in a small rented room above the bakery, saving every penny they could. Delilah continued working at the Lucky Dollar, though Morton had promoted her to a position that included helping with inventory, a job she could now handle thanks to her improving reading skills. Flynn worked at the Morrison Ranch during the day and came home to her each evening. They continued their reading lessons by lamplight in their small room, working through books that Flynn borrowed from the few literate families in town. In March, Flynn finalized the purchase of the land. The cabin was indeed small and rough, but it sat in a beautiful valley with the creek Flynn had mentioned running clear and cold nearby. Mountains rose on all sides, still capped with snow, and pine forests provided timber and shelter. "It is perfect," Delilah said, standing in the doorway of what would be their home. "I can see it. I can see what it will become." They moved in immediately and began the work of making it theirs. Flynn repaired the roof and chinked the gaps in the walls while Delilah cleaned years of neglect from the interior. They built furniture together, simple but functional. Flynn taught her to handle livestock, and they purchased 6 cows, 2 horses, and a flock of chickens with the last of their savings. The work was backbreaking. Delilah had thought she understood hard labor from her years helping her father on the farm, but ranching in the Colorado mountains tested her in new ways. Her hands blistered and her back ached, but she worked alongside Flynn from dawn until dusk, determined to make their dream succeed. Every evening, no matter how exhausted they were, Flynn built up the fire and they sat together with a book. She was reading full novels now, though slowly, and he helped her with words she did not recognize. Her favorite was a collection of poetry that Flynn had purchased for her birthday in April. She loved the rhythm of the verses, the way the words painted pictures in her mind. One warm evening in May, as she read aloud from the poetry collection, Flynn stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You realize what you are doing right now?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Reading. Not just reading. You are reading poetry, understanding it, feeling it. Do you remember when you thought you were too stupid to learn? The memory seemed distant now from another lifetime. I remember, and I remember being wrong." "You were never stupid," Flynn said firmly. "But you were right about one thing. You are remarkable." She set the book aside and moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "I could not have done any of this without you." "We did it together," he corrected. "That is what marriage is. Building something together." Their first year on the ranch was challenging but rewarding. They learned the rhythms of the land, where the best grazing was, how to protect their livestock from predators, when to plant their small vegetable garden. Neighbors were scarce this far from town, but the few they had were friendly and helpful. An older couple, the Hendersons, lived about 3 miles east and took to checking on them occasionally, offering advice born from decades of ranching experience. In late summer, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had seen women die in childbirth, had witnessed the risks involved. But when she told Flynn, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears diminished. "A baby," he breathed, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Delilah, you have made me the happiest man alive." "I am scared," she admitted. "I know, but we will face it together just like everything else." He kissed her softly. And our child will grow up in a house full of books, learning to read from the very beginning. We will give them everything we can. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through autumn. Mrs. Henderson proved invaluable, visiting regularly to check on Delilah and share wisdom about what to expect. Flynn became almost comically protective, insisting Delilah rest more and work less, though she refused to become idle. As winter approached, Flynn made sure they were well stocked with supplies. He did not want Delilah traveling to town in her condition, especially with snow coming. They settled into a peaceful routine, the two of them cocooned in their cabin as the world outside turned white. On a February night with wind howling around the cabin and snow falling thick, Delilah went into labor. Flynn rode through the storm to fetch Mrs. Henderson, his heart in his throat the entire way. By the time he returned with her, Delilah's contractions were coming fast and hard. The labor lasted through the night. Flynn held Delilah's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement even as he silently prayed for her safety. Mrs. Henderson was calm and competent, guiding them both through the process. As dawn broke pale and gray outside, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the squalling infant on Delilah's chest. "Healthy lungs on this one." Delilah looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Flynn leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," Flynn whispered. "You are amazing. Look what you did." They named him Daniel, after Flynn's father. He was a good baby, quick to smile and relatively easy to soothe. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, waking with Delilah for nighttime feedings, rocking Daniel for hours when he was fussy, staring at him with unabashed wonder. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Flynn said one evening, holding Daniel while Delilah prepared supper. "Him and you, my whole world is right here in this cabin." Spring brought new life to the ranch. Their cattle had survived the winter well, and Flynn purchased 4 more to expand their herd. With Daniel strapped to her back in a carrier Flynn had fashioned, Delilah worked the garden, planting vegetables that would sustain them through the next winter. The reading lessons had fallen by the wayside during the pregnancy and Daniel's early months, but one evening in April, Flynn pulled out the books again. "I miss this," he said. "Miss hearing you read, and Daniel should hear stories, even if he is too young to understand." So they resumed their evening ritual, Delilah reading aloud with Daniel nestled between them, Flynn listening with his arm around his family. She read fairy tales and adventure stories, poetry, and even simple farming manuals. Her skill had grown so much that she rarely stumbled over words anymore. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Flynn's careful management and hard work paid off. Their herd expanded. They added sheep to their operation, and Delilah learned to shear and card wool, eventually teaching herself to spin it into yarn. She had found an instruction manual at the general store and, using her hard-won reading skills, figured out the process. When Daniel was 3, Delilah became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, confident in her body's ability and secure in the life they had built. Their daughter was born on a sunny September morning, an easier birth than Daniel's had been. They named her Clara, after Flynn's mother. Clara was different from Daniel, more serious and observant where he had been cheerful and energetic. She seemed to study the world with ancient eyes, taking everything in. Flynn adored her, spending hours just watching her as she grew. "2 children," he said one evening as they sat on the porch they had built the previous summer, watching Daniel chase fireflies in the twilight while Clara slept in Delilah's arms. "A son and a daughter. A ranch that is finally turning a real profit. And you, still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. I am the luckiest man in Colorado. I am the lucky one, Delilah countered. You gave me everything. Not just the reading, though that changed my life. You gave me respect and love and a family. You made me believe I was worth something. You were always worth something, Flynn said firmly. I just helped you see it. As the children grew, reading became a central part of their family life. Every evening, without fail, they gathered by the fire and someone read aloud. First it was Delilah or Flynn reading to the children. But as Daniel got older, they began teaching him his letters the same way Flynn had taught Delilah. By the time he was 5, Daniel could read simple words, his finger tracing the lines in his primer with intense concentration. Clara proved even more voracious for learning. By age 4, she was demanding that her parents teach her what they were teaching Daniel. She learned quickly, seeming to absorb information like a sponge. Delilah saw something of herself in Clara's hunger for knowledge, that desperate need to understand the world through written words. The ranch continued to flourish. By the time Daniel was 7 and Clara was 4, Flynn had expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land from a neighbor who was moving back east. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the increased workload, though Flynn insisted on remaining hands-on with every aspect of the operation. Delilah had become something of a teacher herself, not just to her own children, but to others in the scattered community. Word had spread about the woman who had learned to read as an adult, and several other people who struggled with literacy began seeking her out. She held informal classes in her home once a week, helping 3 older men and 2 young women learn their letters. "You are doing what I did for you," Flynn observed one evening after her students had left, "giving people hope." "You showed me it was possible," Delilah said. "I am just passing that gift along." One afternoon in spring, when Daniel was 8 and Clara was 5, a well-dressed man arrived at their ranch in a fancy buggy. He introduced himself as Charles Hampton, a representative from the Territorial Education Board. "I have heard about your informal school," he said to Delilah as they sat in the cabin that had been expanded over the years to include 2 additional rooms. "How you teach adults to read. It is impressive work." "It is just a few hours a week," Delilah demurred. "Nothing formal." "Perhaps it should be formal," Hampton suggested. "The territory is pushing for more schools, especially in rural areas. Have you considered becoming a certified teacher? We have programs for people with practical teaching experience." The idea stunned her. "I only learned to read myself 12 years ago. I cannot imagine anyone would want me as a proper teacher." "On the contrary, your experience makes you ideal for teaching adults and older children who miss their early education. You understand their shame, their struggles. That empathy is invaluable." He pulled papers from his case. "If you are interested, I can provide information about the certification program." After he left, Delilah stood holding the papers, her mind reeling. Flynn came up behind her, reading over her shoulder. "You should do it," he said. "You would be an amazing teacher. But the children, the ranch, everything we have built here." "The children are both in school now, and Peter handles most of the day-to-day ranch work. You have time, and more importantly, you have a gift. People respect you, trust you. You could help so many." She turned to face him. "You would not mind if I spent time on this. Mind, I am proud of you. When I met you, you were hiding in shame over something that was not your fault. Now look at you. Reading, writing, teaching others. You have become so much more than you ever thought possible, and I love watching you grow." He cupped her face gently. "Never stop growing, Delilah. Never stop reaching for more." With Flynn's encouragement and support, Delilah enrolled in the certification program. It required traveling to Denver twice for examinations and seminars, trips that she found both terrifying and exhilarating. The city was overwhelming after years in the mountains, but the program itself filled her with passion. She learned teaching methods, studied more advanced grammar and mathematics, and connected with other educators from across Colorado. She received her teaching certificate in the summer of 1891. The small ceremony in Denver meant little compared to the celebration Flynn organized when she returned home. He had gathered all her students, both children and adults, along with neighbors and friends from Black Hawk. They had arranged a party in the Hendersons' larger barn with food and music and genuine joy. To Delilah Voss, old Mr. Henderson called out, raising his glass, who proves it is never too late to learn and never too early to teach. The following autumn, Delilah opened an official school on their ranch, held in a building Flynn had constructed for that purpose. She taught 4 days a week, accepting students of any age who wanted to learn. Some were children from surrounding ranches who could not make the journey to Black Hawk regularly. Others were adults like she had been, carrying the secret shame of illiteracy. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Every breakthrough her students made echoed her own journey, reminding her of those evenings by the fire when Flynn had patiently taught her the alphabet. She found herself using many of his methods, his patience, his refusal to accept that anyone was too old or too slow to learn. Flynn sometimes sat in on her classes, ostensibly to help with difficult students but really just to watch her teach. Afterward, he would tell her how proud he was, how far she had come. "Remember when you could not read cat?" he teased gently one evening as they prepared for bed. "I remember everything about those lessons," she said seriously. "Every word, every moment. You saved my life, Flynn." "We saved each other," he corrected, pulling her close. "You gave my life purpose I did not even know I was missing. Teaching you, building this life together, raising our children. This is everything I ever wanted." The years flowed like water. Daniel grew into a responsible young man, taking on more duties on the ranch and showing an aptitude for the business side of farming. Clara developed a love for books that surpassed even her mother's, reading everything she could get her hands on and talking about becoming a real teacher like Delilah, maybe even going to college back east. The school thrived. Over the years, Delilah taught over 50 students, watching them transform as reading opened new worlds to them. Several of her adult students went on to better jobs, armed with literacy. One of her students, a young woman named Margaret, became a teacher herself, opening a school in a mining camp north of Black Hawk. On a cool autumn evening in 1896, 18 years after Flynn first taught Delilah the alphabet, they sat together on their porch. Daniel, now 17, was in the barn checking on a cow about to calf. Clara, 14, was inside reading by lamplight, preparing for the entrance examinations for a teacher's college in Denver. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the region, and Delilah's school had become an institution that people traveled miles to attend. "We did all right, did we not?" Flynn said, taking Delilah's hand. His hair was graying now at the temples, and lines creased his face, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had when he first walked into the Lucky Dollar saloon. "We did more than all right," Delilah said, leaning against his shoulder. "We built something beautiful." "I still love teaching you," Flynn said unexpectedly. "Found a new book in town last week. Thought we could read it together like the old days." "The old days never left," Delilah said, smiling. "Every evening by the fire, remember, that was your promise. And I kept it." "We'll keep it until the day I die," he kissed her forehead. "I love you, Delilah Voss," Loved you from the moment you poured me that first whiskey, loved you more every day since. I love you too. You saw something in me I could not see in myself. You gave me the world through words." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, Clara called out that dinner was ready. Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers, grinning about the successful birth of twin calves. Later that evening, after supper was cleared and the children had gone to their rooms, Flynn built up the fire as he had done thousands of times before. He settled into his chair and pulled out the new book, a collection of essays about the changing West. "Your turn or mine?" he asked, holding it out to Delilah. "Mine," she said, taking the book with hands that no longer trembled when touching the printed page. She opened it carefully, found the first page, and began to read aloud, her voice clear and confident in the firelit room. Flynn listened with his eyes closed, a smile playing at his lips, and Delilah thought about the long journey that had brought them here. From shame and fear to love and purpose. From a woman who could not read a single word to a certified teacher who had helped dozens of others find their own literacy. From a lonely barmaid to a woman with a family, a home, a life rich with meaning. All because a cowboy had offered to teach her by the fire every single evening, and in doing so, had given her not just reading but a future she had never dared to imagine. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls of their home, and Delilah's voice wove the words into the night, each sentence a small miracle, each paragraph a testament to what love and patience could build. The evening stretched on, warm and perfect and complete. Outside, the Colorado night settled over their ranch, over the land they had worked and loved for nearly 2 decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons to teach, new work to be done. But tonight was for this. Sitting by the fire with the man she loved, reading aloud, just as they had done since the very beginning, just as they would continue to do for all the years to come. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though it had its share of struggles and triumphs. It was something quieter, more profound, a story of patience and growth, of 2 people who had found each other in a rough mining town and built a life on the foundation of trust and education. It was a love story written in alphabet lessons and firelight, in slow progress and steady devotion. As Delilah finished the first chapter and looked up to find Flynn watching her with undisguised adoration, she understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without its difficulties, but real and lasting and earned through years of choosing each other, day after day, evening after evening, word by word. "Another chapter?" Flynn asked softly. "Always," Delilah said, turning the page. "There is always another chapter with you." And she continued reading, her voice filling their home with stories, while the fire burned low and steady, and outside the mountains stood eternal watch over the life they had built together in the wild, beautiful heart of Colorado.